Fine. Yes, I hired a professional companion. But why are you crying about it? It was just a transaction because you couldn't perform your duties as a wife.
Hey guys, I'm currently hanging out here at the botanical garden. We got two absolutely insane stories for you today. Real quick, before we start, I'm giving away my free Asian escape plan and scam guide to help you live abroad safely. Just check the pinned comment to grab your copy. Let's jump in.
Let's get one thing perfectly straight right out of the gate. I am not the hero of this story. In fact, if this were a movie, you would probably be throwing popcorn at the screen right now, shouting at me for being an absolute fool. My name is Thomas. I am a retired accountant originally from Denver, Colorado. A few years ago, when I finally decided to hang on my spreadsheets and escape the corporate grind, I did a ton of research on relocating to Asia. Initially, I looked very closely at Malaysia, specifically the MM2H program, which looked fantastic on paper. But ultimately, the vibrant, chaotic energy of Thailand called my name. I packed my bags, moved halfway across the world, and that is where I met Ruby. Ruby is a local Thai woman. She is younger than me, wildly intelligent, and has a laugh that could completely stop traffic in downtown Bangkok. For the first 2 years of our marriage, my life was an absolute dream. We had built a perfect routine together. We spent our days exploring markets, eating incredible food, and, not to brag, our physical relationship was spectacular. We were basically teenagers, completely inseparable. But then came the summer from hell. It started as a minor complaint. Ruby had some stomach pains that we both brushed off as a bad batch of street food. But the pain didn't go away. It escalated into absolute agony. Within 48 hours, she was rushed to the emergency room, and the doctors informed us she needed immediate, major surgery on her colon. What was supposed to be a standard procedure turned into a total nightmare. Because of severe medical complications, Ruby was stuck in a sterile, freezing hospital room for over a month. I spent 34 days sleeping on a terrible plastic chair next to her bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor, terrified I was going to lose her. Eventually, the doctors released her, but bringing her home wasn't the magical finish line I had imagined. Her recovery was incredibly slow and undeniably brutal. She walked around our apartment like she was made of incredibly fragile glass. She was in constant, lingering pain. Naturally, during this agonizing recovery period, our physical intimacy dropped to absolute zero. We had absolutely no intimacy for weeks, which agonizingly stretched into months. Now, I know exactly what you were thinking. Thomas, you selfish jerk, your wife just had her insides completely rearranged to save her life. Have some patience. And you are entirely right. I should have been a saint, but I am an extremely flawed man, and the sudden, complete lack of physical connection was eating away at my sanity. Ruby knew I was struggling. She felt terrible about it. One night, while I was helping her adjust her pillows, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Thomas, I am so incredibly sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel like a broken, useless wife. I know you're frustrated." I immediately kissed her forehead, playing the role of the perfect, understanding husband. "Ruby, please don't be silly. Your health is the only thing that matters. We will get through this. I'm fine, but internally, I wasn't fine. My internal monologue was a blaring warning siren. I was crawling out of my skin. Despite her trying to comfort me in other, non-physical ways, I felt completely deprived. Here is where the mild humor of my life completely dies, and my villain origin story officially begins. Driven by pure, unadulterated selfishness, I convinced myself that I desperately needed an outlet. I didn't want a new girlfriend. I certainly didn't want romance. I just wanted a service, a biological pressure release valve. So, one blistering hot afternoon, while Ruby was resting, I left the house. I walked straight into a local bank branch. I completely bypassed all the machines outside, walked directly up to a human bank teller, and requested a massive, entirely untraceable cash withdrawal. I took that thick envelope of cash, and I used it to hire a high-end professional escort. I rationalized it exactly the way a seasoned accountant would. It was just a transaction, I told myself. A simple exchange of currency for a service. There are no feelings involved, so it isn't really cheating. It's just physical intimacy to save my sanity so I could be a better caregiver to my wife. I walked back into my house that evening feeling absolutely zero guilt. I looked at Ruby, smiled, and asked her how she was feeling. I honestly thought I had committed the perfect victimless crime. I believed my dark little secret was buried forever under a mountain of neat, logical justifications. But I forgot one crucial, undeniable rule about keeping massive secrets. You can never, ever give your friend a playbook for your own sins. Because a few months later, Ruby had fully recovered, our lives were back to normal, and I thought I was entirely in the clear. Until one drunken night out with my buddy David completely detonated my entire existence. Fast forward a few months. The monsoon rains had passed, the skies over Thailand were clear, and Ruby was finally back to her vibrant, laughing self. Her recovery was complete, our routine was back to normal, and our physical relationship had resumed exactly where it left off. I genuinely thought my dark little secret was buried under a concrete slab of my own delusions. But karma is incredibly patient, and it usually arrives wearing the face of a friend. Enter David. David was a good buddy of mine, an expat who had married a lovely woman named Emily. We used to double date all the time, but David was currently going through his own personal hell. Around Thanksgiving, Emily had delivered their baby prematurely. The infant was stuck in a hospital incubator, and the stress was completely eating David alive. One night, I took David out to a local pub to get him out of the house. He looked like a walking zombie. After a few rounds of heavy drinking, the floodgates opened. He started venting about the crushing hospital bills, the lack of sleep, and eventually his extreme frustration over the fact that he wouldn't be having any intimacy with his wife for a very, very long time. Now, a good friend would have just listened. A good friend would have bought him another drink and told him to stay strong for his family. But I was not a good friend. In my deeply intoxicated, morally bankrupt brain, I thought I held the secret to solving his problems. I leaned across the sticky wooden table, lowering my voice like I was dispensing ancient wisdom. "Look, man, you are overthinking this," I whispered. "Just hire a professional companion. It's purely a service. No strings. Hell, I did it the whole time Ruby was hooked up to monitors in the hospital, and it completely saved my sanity." David just stared at me. He didn't high-five me. He didn't laugh. He just gave a slow, uncomfortable nod and took a long sip of his beer. I thought nothing of it. I assumed I had just given him the cheat code to surviving a medical crisis. What I didn't factor in was that David actually possessed a moral compass. The next morning, breaking the imaginary bro code I assumed we shared, David picked up his phone, called Ruby, and told her exactly what I had said. When I came home from picking up groceries that afternoon, the atmosphere in our apartment was suffocating. Ruby was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of our printed financial statements spread out in front of her. She had highlighted a massive cash withdrawal from the exact month she was hospitalized. "Thomas," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "what was this cash for?" Panic seized my chest. I scrambled for an excuse, my accountant brain frantically trying to balance the books of my lies. "Oh, that," I stammered, forcing a chuckle. "The transmission on the car started acting up. I took it to the mechanic, but their card reader was completely broken that day. I had to go to the bank teller and pay him in cash. I didn't want to stress you out while you were sick." Ruby didn't blink. She just stared at me with completely hollow eyes. "Okay," she said softly. I thought I had dodged a massive bullet. I breathed a sigh of relief. But my wife is not a fool. The very next morning, while I was taking a shower, Ruby secretly drove to the exact auto repair shop we always use. She walked right up to the manager and asked for the invoice for our car. The manager looked through their system and shook his head. They had absolutely zero record of our car being serviced during that time. Not a tire change, not an oil check, nothing. When Ruby returned, she cornered me in the living room. There was no more playing dumb. She told me she had gone to the mechanic. The trap had forcefully snapped shut. I froze. I could have begged for forgiveness. I could have fallen to my knees. But instead, my fragile ego took over, and I dropped the act entirely. Fine, I snapped. Yes, I hired an escort. But why are you crying about it? I didn't fall in love with anyone. It was just intimacy. It was a transaction because you couldn't perform your duties as a wife. Ruby physically recoiled as if I had struck her. Her face twisted in absolute horror. A transaction? She whispered. Did you even use protection? Did you think about diseases before crawling back into my bed? I stood there, completely blank. I didn't even think of that, I muttered. In that exact moment, my entire dream life in Thailand shattered into a million pieces because of my own lies and stupidity. Living overseas can feel like paradise, but whether it's a disastrous personal mistake, falling for a fake property listing, or getting caught in a legal nightmare, you can lose it all if you aren't prepared. That's exactly why you need the $1,500 per month Asian escape plan and scam guide. It's the ultimate blueprint to safely navigating life in Asia, securing the right visas, and avoiding the devastating traps that ruin expats' lives. Click the link below to get your free guide. Now, back to the moment my wife realized who she actually married. I watched the realization wash over Ruby's face. The man she thought had heroically stood by her hospital bed was actually a careless, deeply selfish monster. But she didn't scream. She didn't throw plates at the wall. She didn't collapse into a puddle of tears. Instead, she did something that made my blood run absolutely cold. And it was in that chilling moment I knew my entire future was completely, permanently erased. I watched the terrible realization wash over Ruby's face. The man she thought had heroically stood by her hospital bed was actually a careless, deeply selfish monster. But she didn't scream. She didn't throw plates at the wall. She didn't collapse into a puddle of tears. Instead, she did something that made my blood run absolutely cold. And it was in that chilling moment I knew my entire future was completely, permanently erased. Ruby just looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. You know what terrifies me the most, Thomas? She whispered, her voice steady and sharp as a scalpel. It's not just the act itself. It's that you aren't even sad. You aren't angry. You aren't even trying to defend yourself. You just genuinely do not care. You are entirely apathetic about our marriage. Everything I thought I knew about you was wrong. She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed her purse from the counter, pulled her keys from the bowl, and walked to the front door. Where are you going? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my own guilt. To an urgent care clinic, she replied coldly, not even turning around to look at me. I have to go get tested for diseases because of my husband's absolute stupidity. Do not speak to me when I get back. The door clicked shut, and I was left standing in the middle of our living room. I sat down on the couch like a deflated balloon, wondering if I could somehow magically unsay the last 10 minutes of my life. Spoiler alert, you cannot. You cannot unring a bell, and you certainly cannot unhire an escort. When Ruby finally returned hours later, the silence in the house was deafening. She walked straight past me, went into our master bedroom, and began aggressively packing a large suitcase. She moved her clothes, her books, and her toiletries straight into the guest bedroom down the hall. She stepped inside, looked at me one last time with completely dead eyes, and shut the door. The loud, heavy sound of that lock clicking into place was the absolute final nail in my coffin. The next morning, I woke up early, hoping to make her coffee and somehow grovel my way back in her good graces. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was already dressed and heading for the door. She slid a sleek, embossed business card across the kitchen island. I picked it up. It was the contact information for one of the most ruthless, high-profile divorce lawyers in the city. I am meeting with them next Wednesday, Ruby said flatly. I don't even want to look at your face right now. We are done. As she walked out, the gravity of my situation hit me like a runaway freight train. This wasn't just a timeout. This was the total collapse of my life. I suddenly realized that my entire retirement visa setup was tethered directly to my marriage to a Thai citizen. Back when I was planning my retirement, I had spent months researching different options. I had heavily considered the MM2H program, which would have given me independent residency, but I abandoned that path to build a life here with Ruby. Now, without her, I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my legal right to exist in this country. I was going to be completely cast out. To make matters even more agonizing, my wife possesses a very dark, incredibly sharp sense of humor, even in the middle of a crisis. About 4 days into my silent purgatory, a massive, heavy styrofoam cooler was delivered to our front porch. I brought it inside, opened it up, and found an incredible assortment of premium, imported steaks inside. For one brief, highly delusional second, I thought it was a peace offering. I thought, maybe she wants me to fire up the grill? Maybe this is her way of breaking the ice. Ruby walked into the kitchen, grabbed a shipping label, and slapped it right on top of the cooler. "What is that?" I asked quietly. "It is a thank you gift," she replied, taping the box shut. "I bought David a premium Meat of the Month subscription for a whole year. He deserves it for being honest and exposing what a fraud you are." I just nodded, completely defeated. I had to personally carry the box of steaks to the post office and mail it to the man who blew up my life. Honestly, he earned it. So here I am, sitting entirely alone in the guest room of a house that used to be filled with laughter. We were actually planning on trying for a baby soon. We had names picked out. We had a whole future mapped out. Now, because of my own unbelievable selfishness, I am sitting here packing my bags, waiting for Wednesday to arrive so I can sign papers that will permanently end my marriage. I traded my entire future, my dream life, and the woman I love for a few hours of meaningless physical connection. If there is a lesson to be learned from my total destruction, it is this: living overseas is a privilege, not a playground where your actions have no consequences. Whether you make a catastrophic moral failure like I did, or you accidentally stumble into one of the countless legal and financial traps waiting for foreigners, your dream life can vanish overnight. You need to know the landscape before you lose everything. Don't wander in blind, and don't make arrogant mistakes. If you want to actually thrive in Asia, protect your assets, secure your visas properly, and avoid the devastating blunders that send people packing, you absolutely must read the $1,500 per month Asian Escape Plan and Scam Guide. It is the ultimate blueprint for doing this right. Click the link below to get your free PDF guide right now. Learn the rules, protect yourself, and whatever you do, don't be a fool like me. But don't go anywhere just yet. If you thought Thomas's betrayal was wild, our next story is an absolute roller coaster. Let's dive right into story number 2. Let me set the record straight right off the bat. I'm not some naive tourist fresh off a 20-hour flight, and I certainly didn't survive 40 years running a hardware store in Chicago by letting people walk all over me. My name is Levi. I'm 62 years old, and after decades of shoveling snow, enduring brutal Midwestern winters, and dealing with suppliers who couldn't tell a socket wrench from a doorknob, I finally threw in the towel. I packed up my life, waved goodbye to the cold, and moved to Thailand for some well-deserved peace, sunshine, and a quiet retirement. About 6 months ago, I met Jane. She's 28, and for the first few months, things were genuinely great. We go to local weekend markets, share quiet dinners, and just enjoy the slow pace of life I had moved halfway across the world to find. I liked making her happy. I'm way past the whole cutesy, over-the-top dating phase of my life, but I don't mind treating my partner well. I believe in taking care of the people I care about. But somewhere around month 5, the wind shifted. Slowly but surely, I stopped feeling like her partner and started feeling like a human wallet with legs. The real trouble started when Jane batted her eyes over breakfast and suggested a romantic couple's weekend getaway at a high-end beach club resort down the coast. "Just the two of us," she said. "Sun, sand, and quality time to reconnect." It sounded fantastic. I booked the private transport, packed my weekend bag, and was genuinely looking forward to getting away from the city. Imagine my utter shock when I arrived at our pickup spot to find not just Jane, but 8 of her closest friends giggling and hauling oversized, heavy luggage into my hire van. 8 of them. I was explicitly told this was a couple's trip, but suddenly I was the only guy there. I felt less like a boyfriend and more like an unpaid chaperone for a sorority trip. But I bit my tongue. I get along with people, and I figured we could still make the best of it once we got to the resort. Now, here's the kicker. Outside of the main tourist hubs, a lot of locals don't speak much English. Jane's friends certainly didn't speak a word of it. So from the absolute second we arrived at the resort and claimed the VIP beachfront cabana, which I was immediately expected to hand my credit card over for, I was effectively invisible. They chattered away at lightning speed, took endless selfies with their fancy cocktails, and completely ignored my existence. Every time I tried to ask Jane to translate or attempted to join a conversation, the group would go dead silent. They would stare at me like I was a highly confusing piece of modern art, blink a few times, and then immediately turn their backs to me and resume their tight-knit circle. I was completely frozen out, but I wasn't entirely deaf to the situation. At one point, Jane turned to me, a sweet, highly calculated smile plastered on her face, and decided to translate what the group had supposedly been discussing for the last 20 minutes. "Levi," she purred, leaning in and resting her hand on my arm. "My friends think it is such a shame we are staying at a busy resort like this. They think you should buy us a beautiful beachfront villa just down the road. A private one. We could put the land in my name, and they could come visit us whenever they want." I chuckled, thinking it was a dry joke. When her face remained completely flat and expectant, the humor evaporated. "Jane," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm but firm. "You know the law. Foreigners cannot legally own land in Thailand. We can only rent long-term, or we can buy a condominium outright. I am absolutely not funding a massive piece of property that I have zero legal rights to." Her sweet smile vanished in an instant. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might check out the inside of her own skull. She huffed, completely dismissive of my boundaries, and rattled off something sharp to her friends. They all simultaneously looked over their sunglasses at me, with identical expressions of supreme disappointment. It was the first massive, glaring red flag of the day. In that moment, it became painfully clear she didn't want a secure future with me. She wanted a real estate portfolio funded by a foreigner. I tried to take a deep breath and brush it off, hoping we could just get through the afternoon without any more tension. I told myself maybe I was just being a grumpy old man. But what happened next? Well, let's just say the villa conversation was child's play compared to the stunt she pulled an hour later. It was a move so wildly disrespectful, so entirely delusional, that it left me with only two choices: sit there and accept my permanent role as a spineless ATM, or execute an exit strategy so ruthlessly cold it would leave her and her 8 friends completely stranded in paradise. I was sitting there in that luxury cabana, feeling less like a respected partner and more like a discarded piece of faded patio furniture. Jane and her 8 friends were deep in a rapid-fire Thai conversation, a flurry of giggles and pointing that completely excluded me. Remember, outside of the main city hubs, most locals don't speak a lick of English, and her friends are no exception. That was fine. I didn't expect them to. What I expected was for my girlfriend of 6 months to actually acknowledge I existed. I decided to make one last-ditch effort to salvage this so-called romantic couple's trip. I stood up and gently tapped Jane's shoulder. "Hey, Jane," I said, pointing down the coastline to a sleek, multi-story building gleaming in the distance. "Why don't we take a walk, just the two of us? We can go look at that new condominium development. It's beautiful, and it's something I could actually legally buy for us to enjoy." I thought it was a brilliant compromise. I was showing interest in our future, but playing by the legal rules. Instead, Jane physically recoiled. She pulled her shoulder away from my hand and turned to me, dropping her sweet facade entirely. In perfect, crystal-clear English, ensuring I caught every single syllable of venom, she hissed, "Why are you clinging to me like some desperate tourist?" I froze. Her friends stopped giggling, watching the spectacle with wide eyes, whispering to each other. "Excuse me?" I asked, completely taken aback. "Stop trying to separate me from my friends," she snapped, her voice rising over the sound of the crashing waves. "You are embarrassing me. Just sit there and let us enjoy the weekend." Before I could even process the absolute audacity of what she had just said, Jane stood up. She rattled off something sharp and commanding in Thai to her friends. In unison, all 8 of them grabbed their designer beach bags, stood up, and marched out of the cabana. We were going to the private spa wing. Jane tossed over her shoulder, not even looking back. Do not follow us. Just like that, they vanished. I was left sitting completely alone at a sprawling table covered in empty cocktail glasses, half-eaten fruit platters, and an open, rapidly growing tab that was securely pinned to my room number and my credit card. I'm a sensible guy from Chicago. I don't do public screaming matches, and I don't make rash decisions. So, I gave her a chance. I pulled out my phone and typed out a single text message. You have exactly 10 minutes to come back. Act like my partner and treat me with some respect. If you don't, I am taking the private van back to the city alone, and you can figure out your own way home. I hit send. Then I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then 20. She was choosing to ignore me. Curious, I opened the luxury resort's mobile application, which was synced to my room to track expenses. I hit refresh. Ding. 9 deep tissue massages loaded onto the screen. Ding. 9 gold flake facial treatments. Ding. 9 imported sparkling waters and artisan lunch plates. The bill was climbing faster than a skyscraper elevator. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was actively trying to drain me dry while punishing me for not buying her a completely illegal beachfront villa. I stood up, grabbed my overnight bag, and walked straight into the opulent air-conditioned lobby. I didn't make a scene. I walked up to the front desk and politely explained to the clerk that I was checking out early. I paid for my 1 iced tea and my portion of the cabana rental. Then, I formally revoked my credit card authorization for the room, the cabana, and the entire spa wing, effective immediately. Walking out of that grand lobby, realizing I was just hours away from being financially drained by a fake relationship and a shady villa scheme, it hit me hard. The face culture clash, the real estate traps, it was all happening exactly by the book. So many expats fall into these exact traps because they let their hearts write checks their brains can't cash, or they just don't know the local rules. That is exactly why you need to protect yourself with the $1,500 per month Asian escape plan and scam guide. This guide breaks down exactly how to live, eat, and thrive overseas without getting burned. It covers everything from the true love real estate trap, like the illegal land scheme Jane tried to pull on me, to dodging fake landlords and navigating unspoken social rules. Don't let your retirement fund become a scammer's payday. Click the link in the description to get the guide and bulletproof your life abroad. Now back to my exit strategy. I walked out to the parking lot and found a private van I had hired for the weekend. The driver was leaning against the hood, smoking. He looked surprised to see me back so soon, especially with only 1 bag. Where to, boss? He asked. Back to the city, I said, climbing into the cool, air-conditioned back seat. Just me. As we pulled out of the resort gates and merged onto the highway, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I turned off my phone notifications, leaned my head back against the leather seat, and watched the palm trees roll by. I felt incredibly peaceful. I expected she would be a little angry when she realized I was gone. I anticipated a few pouting texts, maybe a silent treatment for a couple of days. But what I didn't know as I cruised comfortably back up the coast was that by revoking that credit card authorization mid-massage, I had just lit the fuse on an absolute powder keg. I was about to trigger a chaotic, resort-wide meltdown that would expose exactly who Jane really was. For hours later, I was safely back in my own condominium in the city. The air conditioning was humming quietly, I had a cold drink in my hand, and I was looking out at the beautiful skyline. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet I had worked 40 years at a Chicago hardware store to finally enjoy. Then my phone completely exploded. It started vibrating so violently across the kitchen counter, I thought it was going to rattle itself right onto the floor. I picked it up to find over 50 frantic, furious messages, accompanied by half a dozen missed calls and a string of extremely dramatic voice notes. Jane had finally noticed I was gone. Now, she didn't notice because she missed my charming personality, and she certainly didn't notice because she suddenly felt bad for ignoring me. No, she noticed because her and her 8 friends had finally finished their multi-hour pampering session, strutted up to the spa reception desk in their plush robes, and try to charge a mountain of expensive treatments to my room number. Keep in mind, as I mentioned before, outside of the main tourist pockets, most locals don't speak much English. So I can only imagine the absolute chaos at that spa counter. The polite, smiling, but incredibly firm resort staff who have zero patience for unpaid bills. Handing Jane the massive invoice, trying to explain in broken English and Thai that the foreigner had checked out, the credit card was gone, and she was now entirely responsible for the tab. I hit play on the first voice note. I actually had to hold the phone away from my ear because she was practically screeching. "Levi, how could you leave us stranded?" she yelled, her voice echoing off what sounded like the resort lobby walls. "The bill is massive. The manager won't let us leave. You need to transfer money right now and send your driver back. You are ruining my reputation." I took a slow sip of my drink, entirely unbothered. I typed back a simple, calm message. "I sent you a text warning you I was leaving. You had 10 minutes to come back and acknowledge me. You chose to ignore me. You chose your company for the weekend, and now you can choose how to get them home." A few seconds later, my phone rang. I answered it, putting on speakerphone. "You are a monster," Jane shrieked. "My friends live completely out of the way. It is your duty as the man to transport us. We have heavy luggage. Transfer the payment for a private van right now." "Jane," I said, my voice as flat and steady as a Midwestern cornfield. "I'm not your father, and I am certainly not your bank. Download a ride-share application. There are 9 of you. You can pool your money together and split the cost. Have a safe trip. Do not hang up on me." I hung up. Then I turned my phone on silent, tossed it onto the couch, and went about my evening. I found out later, through a mutual acquaintance, exactly how that night ended for them. Because I refused to foot the bill, Jane and her friends had to drain whatever cash they had in their designer purses just to settle the spa invoice. That left them with practically nothing for transportation. There was no luxury VIP van waiting for them. Instead, those 9 women, dragging their oversized, heavy luggage, had to march out to the main highway and hail down a cramped, sweaty public minibus. They spent 3 hours crammed shoulder to shoulder on vinyl seats, bumping along the coastline all the way back to the city. The sheer mental image of it still makes me chuckle. Of course, by the time she finally made it back, I was branded a total villain by her entire friend group. She sent me one final, incredibly dramatic message blaming me for her supreme humiliation at the resort, completely ignoring the fact that she had treated me like a ghost the entire day and tried to hustle me into an illegal real estate trap. I didn't even reply. I just hit block. When I look back on that weekend, I don't feel angry. Sure, I wasted a little bit of time, and I lost some gas money on the van. But in the grand scheme of things, it was the cheapest lesson I could have possibly learned. By simply walking away, I saved my retirement fund, I kept my dignity, and most importantly, I preserved my peace of mind. I learned that sometimes leaving someone stranded is the absolute best way to rescue yourself. Listen, retiring overseas is incredible. The food, the weather, the lifestyle, it really is everything you dream it to be. But the sad reality is that a lot of good, honest guys come over here, let their guard down, and end up being treated like walking checkbooks because they don't understand the unwritten rules of the culture. They fall for the true love real estate trap, but they get drained dry by people who see their kindness as weakness. You do not have to be one of them. If you want to thrive overseas without becoming a cautionary tale, you need to arm yourself with the right knowledge. That is why I highly recommend you grab a copy of the $1,500 per month Asian Escape Plan and Scam Guide. It is a completely free PDF, and it breaks down the exact line item budgets, the visa rules, and the most common fatal expat scams that leave foreigners completely broke. It covers everything from spotting fake landlords to understanding the unspoken social rules of Asia that can make or break your entire experience. Do yourself a favor. Click the link below, enter your email, and get the free PDF right now. Protect your retirement, build a life you actually enjoy, and never let anyone treat you like an unpaid VIP ticket. Trust me, the peace of mind is worth it.
If you enjoyed the story and learned a thing or two, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.